Good morning and welcome to this session on trade. First of all, my name is John Denton. I'm the new Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce based in Paris, and it's a great honour and a privilege to be here. So I'd like to shout out to the organisers and the initiators of this discussion because, as I understand the week progressing, it's not just a celebration and a commemoration of the Armistice Day, but also combined on this is actually discussions over very significant global shifts, particularly around technology, the internet. I've spoken already at a number of discussions on that, on global governance. And then during the course of this week, we're talking more about disruptions and solutions. So disruptions to peace, or potential disruptions to peace and solutions around that. And today, and in this session, we're going to talk about disruptions around global trade and the consequences of that, but more importantly, starting to look forward to solutions. So I won't take a long time in introducing the topic, but I will remark that as Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce, the actual issues that united my founders were built around the exact issues or parallel issues to what we're experiencing today. And this is also almost 100 years ago. In fact, we will celebrate the centenary of the International Chamber of Commerce next year. And the founders of the International Chamber of Commerce were brought together because they genuinely believed that if they could enable an environment where goods could cross borders without being accompanied by troops, where goods could cross borders unimpeded by protectionism, then there was a higher probability of peace and prosperity. In fact, the DNA of the International Chamber of Commerce is about enabling business worldwide to secure peace, prosperity, and opportunity for all. So that's an important link, I think, between what brought together our founders, who are known as the merchants of peace, and the challenges that we're confronting today. So taking a step back, it's always useful to sort of ask two big questions. The first is, where do we stand right now? And the other one is, how do we get here? I think it's fair to say that before the global financial crisis, trade as we measure it was on the up. It was growing just under 4%. It was actually last year at 3.6%, the fastest rate of growth since the global financial crisis. But now we are pretty well all at one that we are staring at or confronting a fairly fragile trade outlook. And material increases in trade barriers have even brought the IMF now to cut its outlook for global GDP growth in its most recent statement. And if this continues, I think it's fair to say that we are starting to identify emerging systemic risks which will be challenging for us to handle through the existing multilateral trading system. And that's actually one of the big challenges we're seeing. And to be bold, but perhaps to be a little provocative, someone like me looking at this, and last week I was in China speaking at the Shanghai CIIE, which was founded, again, a first, as the Paris Peace Forum is a first of its type. The CIIE is the first of its type founded by President Xi, and alongside that, I spoke at the plenaries about an issue which was the trade outlook. But coming from China, speaking now in Paris, it's fair to say that one of the clouds looming over the horizon is the potential for an economic iron curtain to emerge. And to be provocative, are we starting to see the shapes of a new Cold War emerge as well? And so it's fitting in the week of the Paris peace discussions that in that context we start thinking about the sorts of solutions that might help us avert the course we're on that could lead to those two outcomes. So how do we get here? I think that the tensions, concerns over the World Trade Order and what is known as now the uneven benefits and spread of trade benefits have been building for some time. At the same time, the global governance of world trade has seen a sharp downturn or slowdown since the GFC. From my observation, and I participated now in a number of dialogues at Geneva in the WTO, it's fair to say that WTO members have struggled to find consensus on meaningful new trade rules since the organisation's establishment more than 20 years ago. And I would say, and one of our speakers may disagree, but I would say that the WTO is actually struggling itself to adapt to a changed economic landscape and changes brought by new technological developments, such as the digital economy. It just wasn't set up with the current geopolitical framework in mind, nor with a lot of the technological changes that we've seen in mind, particularly the way in which they apply to business and business models. So our aim here is not to admire the problem, but it's actually to work out where we go to from here. And one of the first things I'd say is that one of the aspects that's been missing in the story so far has been a very clear voice from business, and the ICC has taken it upon itself, in line with its DNA, to establish a second track process now to support the kind of discussions that are necessary to start finding a new pathway for the multilateral trading system. But one of the benefits we have today is the opportunity to illuminate what that pathway might look like, and we have an illustrious panel to assist us in doing so. The first, if I can introduce Isabel Durant, who's the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Isabel, if you can join us on stage. You get your own music, it's themed, it's very good. And now I can introduce Marion, JANSEN, the Chief Economist of the International Trade Centre. Karien van GENNIP, who's the former Dutch Minister for International Trade, CEO of ING Bank France, and also Vice Chairman of the International Chamber of Commerce here in Paris. And finally, Alan WOLFF, Deputy Director General, World Trade Organization. Now, before I start, I have to say that I have recently signed a pledge that I will only participate in panels that are not manels. And what that means is the panel actually has to have better gender diversity than we traditionally see. And I have to say that we've done a great job today in doing so. So we're not going to, I'm not going to ask the speakers to provide opening statements, but just to give you a bit of a rundown, there are a number of themes that I want to follow up with our distinguished speakers, and then as we move forward, I want to open this up to discussion to enable you to actually ask questions, and hopefully what we want to do is then wrap with some closing comments from each of the speakers and suggest a potential pathway if we can grapple together what's come forward. I suppose I'll start with you, Alan, and this is really, I want to focus now a bit on the economic impact of a trade war. Alan, how worried should we be, given the kind of tit-for-tat sanctions, and if you don't mind my framing of this as a potential Cold War out there, how worried should we be about that emerging?
There is strong reason for concern. There is promised escalation. So there could be an increase in tariffs across the Pacific as well as across the Atlantic, although more selectively. There is also a reason for hope. That is that the solution with China, between the U.S. and China, lies most likely in coming within the rules to an increasing extent. And that is an active project of many of the leading participants in the WTO. So on balance, what has happened is the risks, the threats, have caused a rethinking and a recommitment on the part of many members to address the problem you state, for example, bring the rules up to date, but also bring the rules up to date with respect to different kinds of economies and the current challenges that we face.
Karien, how worried should we be?
Yes, we have to be worried. We can already see the first impacts that not just companies are suffering from higher trades, but that we start to lose trust in the system, that companies start to be uncertain about the next round of tariffs and the outcome of trade disputes. So there's a real concern. On the other hand, as Alan was saying as well, I think it takes 2 or 3 even to really start a trade war. And as long as the responses of some of the countries are really measured, and you can see today that the response of China are relatively measured vis-à-vis the US, and that some of the countries are taking their trade disputes still to the WTO, so they still want to go through the rule-based system. 2 weeks ago, it was the European Union, China, that started the discussion at the WTO about the US tariffs on aluminum and steel. So I think that is a sign that we're seeing that there is a balance in the system. But to be fair to the concerns raised not just by the US government, but by many, there are some challenges in the trade system today. There are some rules that we need to challenge. There are some ways that we try to do business now that we need to change. And moreover than that, some of those concerns today, and I might not agree with the tone of voice, I might not agree with the solution that the US government proposes, but yes, there are not only winners of globalization. Yes, there are adverse effects that we need to mitigate. And yes, there are some members of the WTO that are not a market economy, that might still be classified as a developing economy, while they're actually already one of the largest economies in the world. So those are things we need to address. And we need to be very, very concerned about what we see as a crisis of trust of our middle classes, not just fueled by trade and globalization, also by digitalization, by immigration. If we don't address those fears in the right way, we will see these elections, we will see these challenges to our own trading system time and time over and over again.
Isabelle, I mean, UNCTAD, you look at this from a developing world perspective as well. So how worried should we be in the developing world?
Yes, thank you, because I will follow what my predecessor said regarding the broader picture, because my picture is based on the developing countries. UNCTAD is dedicated to the support to developing countries in the relationship between trade and development. And it's why, when we speak about trade war or Cold War, does it mean that before it was trade peace and trade warm? Maybe not completely, because we know, and the WTO is knowing very well, which are the permanent tension in the discussion even before inside the WTO regarding the question of social dumping, tariff dumping, non-tariff measures, etc., and also environmental question, the relationship between environment and jobs, etc. So those tensions are factor of peace or factor of peace in trade, and I agree with the fact that trust is today a little bit broken or in instability. How could we, from a developing country's point of view, redevelop this trust? Well, they are probably, the developing countries are probably the first victims of this war. I mean that they will pay a lot regarding growth, investment in their country, which are so important for their development, is completely in danger with this tariff war between China and US and a little bit EU in the circle. And it's true that China is a little bit in a special position, being a developing country or a country in development in the WTO, but also the country developing Belt and Road Initiative and all this development and economic projects. So it's why today probably the rules, the current rules, but also the way to go further in the discussion will not be so easy for the developing countries, because they are, of course, the first victims of this big war.
Marion, from an economist's point of view, and we thank you for joining us, identified before that the IMF has already cut its forecast in GDP growth because of what they see as rising tensions, not just in trade, but also some issue in emerging markets. I mean, how do you see the impact of this tension in terms of economic outlooks? The economic outlook.
Yeah, personally, I believe that if we only stay in the scenario of a trade war between the United States and China, the impacts may not be that huge. Yes, we would see an impact on GDP in the United States and in China. There would be some spillovers, but that could be relatively limited. I see three big potentials for problems if there are spillovers into other areas. One problem is if this trade war leads to a weakening of existing institutions, notably the World Trade Organization. And we are already seeing some of this with the weakening of the appellate body at the WTO. Second, if this spills over into the financial markets, you mentioned emerging economies, this is already happening too, and we are seeing finance being used as a weapon. China selling US Treasury bonds, the United States telling the EU, we're going to block your access to the banking system if you don't do or do certain things. And the third problem is, the third danger is a Cold War scenario that what I describe, Isabel, as a scenario where countries are asked to choose camps. If the EU, if the African countries, if other Asian countries have to take stances, have to choose either China, either the United States, that's going to be dramatic for economic growth.
I'll just make one quick comment on the way through about, it always sounds dramatic to talk about an emerging Cold War or Iron Curtain. But if I just compare the CIIE and the Paris Peace Week, not one developed country leader participated at the CIIE. And there was a very significant Davos-type discussion led by President Xi. It was all developing countries, and it was very clear that China has positioned itself as the leader of the developing countries. That is quite a contrast to the discussion. I know there's Northern Southern Hemisphere discussions here, but there are the kind of traces there. But let's shift. I think we can all agree that there are problems and there is fragility in the outlook. So the question then is, let's start moving towards solutions, and let's look at the governance of the whole process. So flipping to you, Alan, if I could. Do we still need the kind of governance model we have with the WTO in the 21st century? Or is there something we should be thinking about which is different to that?
The WTO, I think, is absolutely essential. It does need change, and change is what is being focused on by many of the members currently. There was a meeting first of all, President Macron called for reform back in March at the OECD Ministerial. And that was followed by the Canadian Trade Minister hosting a group of 12 invitees to meet in Ottawa last month. So change is in the air, all in a positive direction, all to try to manage the current situations, the current challenges, as well as extending the rules to new areas. One thing I might say is that, because we're at a peace forum, the WTO, its predecessor, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, were formed in order to help sustain peace. That was the whole idea, of not to repeat the problems, the mistakes following the armistice 100 years ago. And it's still needed today. It's needed across the Pacific to manage the problems between the U.S. and China. It's needed with respect to development. The accessions process, the joining of the WTO, those countries report, that process reports to me. That's one of my responsibilities. And these are fragile economies, so war-torn economies. Liberia, Afghanistan were the last two in. South Sudan, Timor-Leste, Syria, Somalia. They still need the multilateral trading system, and they need it even more, but certainly on a par with the United States and the EU and Japan and China. So I think it does come together, and it is needed for the WTO is needed in this revised form to meet current challenges, very much needed for the 21st century.
Well, Isabel, from the development point of view, again, I mean, I looked at the UNCTAD recent report, and I'd have to say I would perceive a pretty negative view about open economies and global trade as part of the emerging narrative there. Maybe I'm misunderstanding some of the signals, but how does the developing world see this framework?
I think that the multilateral discussion in WTO is absolutely useful and have to be protected. That's absolutely necessary because otherwise what's happened today and what could happen more and more, it's only bilateral agreements in not the best condition, with a lot of measure taken from one side and another, and it's killing or weakening the multilateral system in trade is crazy. So that's not mean that it is perfect as such, and that something could be a better, not only better organized, but also better focused in the new rules. But are new rules able, is WTO able to adapt and to take new rules? That's the question, because today the developing countries are in a position where, for instance, on e-commerce or digitalization, they refuse to have a debate in the WTO, or they are accepting conversation but no rules. Why? Probably, not probably, certainly because they are a little bit aware regarding what they could lose in this situation, because they are less equipped for digitalization. But we need rules. We need global rules. It's why we try in UNCTAD to prepare, to discuss, to organize a conversation in a safe place, a place where there is no threat or bad rules, or rules perceived as maybe with bad consequences for developing countries, in order to equip them in a discussion that they, at the end, they will have to have in the WTO. Secondly, I'm not sure that only free trade is not as such the solution. Of course, free trade has to be accompanied with a lot of rules, protection, but it's completely different as protectionism. I think that we have to make the difference between protectionism and protection. It's why I don't like the word barriers. I prefer non-tariff measure as non-tariff barriers, because some measures have to be taken in order to protect environment, in order to protect common goods in some sector where we could speak about common goods. What about human rights? What about all those things that it's important also to protect, in order to avoid that developing countries could be or could have the perception that they are the loser of the globalization, or the loser of the only free trade agreement or free trade. So it's why I think that all the rules which could help to protect common goods, to protect climate, to protect and to fight against inequalities, which are also a big problem, and which means that inequalities reinforce or enhance populist approach, and hence the way of the people to defend or to propose or to support populist approach, because they are loser or they are feeling loser. So it's why we have to work on what you said about inequalities and all those things, because otherwise the loser of the globalization, and especially the developing countries or the post in the developing countries, will not stay or be only the witness of this situation.
Karien, in your opening comments, you started to talk a little bit about the sorts of issues that people should be considering for the future. What do you see as the key principles for a successful global trading framework?
Let me first say that I think we've taken a good trading system for granted in the last decades, like we've taken peace for granted, like we've taken global governance for granted. And the last 2, 3, 4 years, we're challenged because it's not working as more as it was. And we need to find solutions how to better govern, manage the WTO and many other organizations. And if we don't do that, then we will lose those elections, then we will lose the support for multilateralism and for a global governance. And it's even more so important today because the world is becoming more interconnected than it was before. Through digitalization, through e-commerce, digital trade, through transparency, media. And that means that developments are going faster, are more transparent. Everybody can see what's happening and can see it now and not read it weeks later in a newspaper. And if you look at some of the armed conflicts in the world, then we've always said for a country that comes out of an armed conflict, we need 3 Ds. We need defense, we need diplomacy, and we need development. And without a good trading system, you won't have development. you won't be able to rise those countries out of their misery and create a real future. And if those countries don't have a real future, you will get the next armed conflict, you will get people on the move, immigration. So you need to address those trade issues and the way we deal with them today. So looking forward, there's now consensus in decision making, which means that one single country can stop the whole decision making. That's definitely something to look at. The single undertaking, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. That means for the last 20 years, there have been no signatures under agreements for one particular area, for instance, services, digital trade, farms. So those are things to challenge. But what we want to keep a rule-based system, because both governments, but businesses as well, need to be certain about what they can expect. We need dispute resolution. We need something that all members continue to subscribe to. Even if they choose a multilateral deal or even a bilateral deal, please let them subscribe to the WTO. And I think that is a very important point. It should not just be driven by governments. We have to include the businesses and we have to include the citizens.
Well, look, on that point, we're moving into the last 5 minutes of the discussion. Why don't I flip to what do you think the role of business should be in reimagining and actually helping create a framework? So maybe I'll start with you, Marion. Have you got any comments on that?
At the International Trade Center where we work, we very much work with and for business. We work with small and medium-sized enterprises in mainly developing and emerging economies to help them to trade, to make trade happen. And maybe I go back from there to the question you asked before, is what do we need in order for globalization to work better? Again, I do think we need two things. We need the balance between big and small to work better, and that includes the balance between big business and small business, between big business and small voters, small consumers. For the future, therefore, I think in this context that themes like competition policy will play an important role, notably in the field of the digital economy. You must imagine the market value of the 10 largest internet companies equals the GDP of my home country, Germany, equals the GDP of all the members of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement together. That's business being bigger than countries. There are big issues there that we have to solve. So this big-small balance is important. The other important theme is make sure small business and everybody is connected to this beautiful global system. That includes being connected to ICT, that includes being connected to infrastructure, and this may explain why many heads of developing countries go to Shanghai, to the Chinese import fair, because China is building the roads, the bridges that the developing country world needs.
Why don't I just ensure that we get some audience participation here? Why don't I open it up to the audience now? And if you want to call for the microphone and ask any questions, then I'll direct it through. We're moving into our last 3 minutes. So maybe up front here, if you could just introduce yourself as well. We prefer questions rather than statements from the floor. There's no such thing as a good question or a bad question, but there is such thing as a long question. Sir.
Okay, my name is Samuel Getachew. I'm a reporter from Ethiopia. My question is to you, sir. Ethiopia has been lobbying to join the WTO for a long, long time. It's been more than 10 years since they've been lobbying for a membership. What's holding their membership? Because if you look at Ethiopia, it's changing its narrative from an aid-dependent society to one of the biggest growing economies in the region. But in terms of foreign investors, I don't know if you've been to Ethiopia, we have all kinds of fake intercontinentals, fake, KFC and so on. It's only because Ethiopia is not a member of WTO, these investors, these brand names have nowhere to complain and have the government take action. So I just want to know if you give me a brief reason why the membership of Ethiopia being rejected. Isn't it better to have Ethiopia within WTO so the growing economy, the growing environment would have a certain standard? Thank you.
The principle of the WTO is universality. The hope is that all countries will join, and there are 22 in the queue right now to come in. I have not been to Ethiopia. There's a meeting on food safety that is co-sponsored by the WTO and the World Health Organization and the Food and Agriculture Organization in February, and I will hope to have actually a better answer than I could today about the issues. On average, it takes 16 years to join the WTO. A number of countries are trying to accelerate that process now. It takes an enormous amount of change. When China joined, it changed 10,000 rules and regulations and laws. There's an enormous hurdle in coming in, but that reform process really helps the economy integrate into the world economy. And of course, in the case of China, hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty over the last 20 years as part of WTO membership. So I don't have a direct response. It's a member-driven organization. All the members have to agree to accede, to have a new member accede. Whether there's a political issue, I do not know.
So, question about midway through, slightly on the left, just here.
Je voulais juste poser la question dans le commerce mondial, comment est-ce qu'on peut arriver à cultiver la justice sociale? Merci.
Merci. Are there other questions? Yes, down the front here, first on the second row. Just here. And then the gentleman immediately behind. And then there's a question. I can see you there, so I'll come back to you. Yes, please.
My name is Victoria from Venezuela, and I'm part of the Student Association of Amnesty International in the Netherlands. My question is, do you think that it will happen anytime soon, reform, especially when it comes to making decisions by consensus, which has shown to be problematic, to reach a certain solution, and you've seen it at the WTO. So we know that it's a necessary institution, but how to reform, especially when you already have that and the way that can make it difficult?
Well, great question. There's actually probably two perspectives look at that from. One is institutional, and the other is from participants. So maybe I'll start with you, Isabelle. The issue of consensus-based decision-making is long rehearsed, particularly in the business world, saying, look, we can understand why you have consensus-making when you create a treaty, but to make it operational, the idea that it has to be continually consensus-based, that's actually an impediment. Well, what do you think about that?
It's probably one of the things that the members of the WTO have to discuss. Because, so it was said, it's a member-driven organization. It means that at the end you have to have the agreement of all the members in order to change the rules, and also the rules regarding the number of years that you need for Ethiopia or other countries to become member. It's true that 16 years is very long. Sometimes when you become member, it's no more the same economy. Well, when you see how economy is evolving so rapidly with digitalization and all those things, 16 years, it's a very long delay. But, well, that's something that the members have to discuss, which if they would like to change or to adapt the rhythm or the nature of the rules in order to be member, also in order to decide. Personally, I come from the EU. Before UN, I was member of the European Parliament, so I know very well how even in the European process, it's long and difficult to discuss and to decide. Even in the EU, where you have a commission, but it's not the case in the WTO or in the UN system, where it's only by consensus between member states that you could go further. So I don't think that we could change that from one day to another, but it's true that's something that probably have to be part of the next reform, if there is, of course, a consensus between the member states in order to accelerate the process or facilitate or simplify the process. I would also like to answer to Madame,
yep.
And I will do it in French by respect for you. So, vous avez posé la question de comment est-ce qu'on peut faire avancer la justice sociale à travers le commerce. C'est évidemment une question extrêmement large. Je l'ai évoqué très rapidement parce que c'est vrai que, par exemple, l'accord de libre-échange qui a été acquis sur le principe au niveau africain va demander une série de mesures concrètes pour faire un marché unique africain qui à la fois doit aider à la circulation des biens et des échanges à travers le changement des règles tarifaires, mais aussi avec une attention à ceux, et je pense en particulier aux femmes, qui sont celles qui portent une bonne partie de l'économie ou qui peuvent la porter. Et le commerce n'est pas une mesure neutre du point de vue du genre. Dans pas mal de pays africains, par exemple, pas tous, l'accès au marché, l'accès à un compte en banque, l'accès à la propriété du terrain, la question des héritages est une vraie question qu'on doit régler pour pouvoir faire accéder l'ensemble des communautés les plus pauvres à la fois à un commerce et un commerce plus équitable, plus juste, qui rémunère ses producteurs. Deuxième chose que je voudrais dire, c'est que la question des fameuses global value chains, donc toutes ces longues chaînes de production, généralement, les plus petits producteurs à la fin sont ceux qui bénéficient le moins de la redistribution au sein de la chaîne de valeur. Ça, c'est aussi une question qui est centrale si on veut faire du commerce un outil non seulement de développement, mais de développement plus juste, de développement mieux partagé, mieux redistribué. C'est une question qui est à la fois dans les mains des autorités nationales, mais aussi du secteur privé et de la manière dont on donne aux plus grandes compagnies la possibilité de tirer le bénéfice de la chaîne de valeur plutôt que de la partager plus équitablement avec les plus petits acteurs de la chaîne. Et c'est la question de pas mal de pays africains qui sont dépendants des produits de base, le coton, les métaux, toutes sortes de produits de base, mais qui ne transforment pas assez leurs produits pour les faire entrer dans une chaîne de valeur avec une vraie valeur ajoutée, redistributive dans leur pays. Donc l'approche régionale en Afrique est extrêmement importante pour essayer d'avoir des chaînes de valeur plus régionales, qui sont plus faciles pour les petits producteurs, pour les producteurs qui vont changer la vie des communautés, qui vont peut-être élaborer plus de justice sociale. Le dernier aspect, c'est évidemment la gouvernance en tant que telle, les institutions d'un pays qui doivent être elles aussi de bonne qualité ou de meilleure qualité du point de vue de la gouvernance et des règles de la gouvernance institutionnelle.
Thank you very much. Alan, just returning to the question of consensus-based decision-making, do you think that there is an appetite building for certain issues that could only be dealt with by consensus, others that could actually operate differently? I mean, what sort of thinking is going on at the moment inside the membership at Geneva?
The WTO actually has several models within it. The trade facilitation agreement was not one size fits all. It was go at the speed you can go to get to, but to get to the same level, to get the same level of openness ultimately, to have facilitation of trade across borders. It has plurilateral agreements, like the government procurement agreement, where there are 19 members, including one is the EU, so that adds another 28 currently. And the UK is seeking to exceed after Brexit. So there are a variety of ways of moving forward. There are joint initiatives that are so-called open plurilaterals. It's a discussion at present, and it is not north-south. There are a lot of developing countries present and leading in the discussion, and everyone is welcome. We don't know where it'll end up, whether it will be a consensus and all have to join or all will join, we don't know. One thing that has to change is the attitude of every country has to be a net contributor. I spoke at the University of the Western Cape in Cape Town 3 weeks ago, and one student said to me, you travel around a number of countries, and what do they say they want to do for South Africa? And I say, actually, that's not the first thing that comes out of their mouths when I go to a foreign capital. That's not what they're thinking about. But we do have to think more about every country, every member of the WTO, being a net contributor. And if it's a poor country, if it's like, for example, I deal with cotton development assistance in West Africa, Chad, Mali, Benin, Burkina Faso, the net contribution can be ideas. What can help them? They should come forward, and they are, with ideas as to what will help them. That's a net contribution to the system. We can no longer exist on a me before you attitude in the WTO. And that's true for each and every major player and the middle countries and the smaller developing countries as well. You can have a pretty strong voice whether you're from Jamaica or you're from the EU in the course of WTO debates.
There's a gentleman in the third row, the front. Could you just introduce yourself?
Andres from Chile, and I work at the OECD. And I want to know if we can still speak about the theory of dependency and what's the role of the world inequalities, and they are reflected in the work of the WTO, like in the bargaining power between the countries.
Marion, do you want to have a go at that?
Yeah, we see currently a very nasty bargaining power, a relatively nasty bargaining power game being played. I have personally been shocked that the United States used the access to the financial system tool when it came to the European negotiations with or doing business with Iran. That shows that everybody is looking at what are the tools I have at my hand. China is looking at rare earths also as one of the tools. This doesn't look like a nice game ahead. Now, when it comes to who depends on whom, this world is currently interdependent. We all depend on each other. And we are all should be interested in making this system work together. In fact, those most interested in the WTO are the big countries. An institution like the WTO exists because the big ones will have always a tendency to want to hurt each other. They can win from this. You need an institution to bind that animal spirit. This is why the WTO exists. This is why the WTO will have the greatest benefit to the United States, to China, to the European Union once they want to sit together again. Everybody else loses a voice and loses out a lot if the WTO is weakened. But the system is very important for the big players, and I believe they are aware of this.
We've got 3 questions, and then I want to turn back to the panel for closing comments. So, gentlemen on the top left-hand side there, and then there's 2 questions over here, one at the front, and then the gentleman in the second row.
Good morning. My name is Stephen Everts. I work for the European Union, and I want to ask about the dispute settlement mechanism, because this is, if you like, the crown jewel of the WTO. There's so much in international life where we are completely dependent upon pure intergovernmental mechanisms and governments abiding by what they have agreed to in principle, but there's no way to go when that's not the case. But the WTO has. However, the dispute settlement is in deep, deep trouble because of the attitude of one country. So can we have from you the outlook on saving this, and where do the rest of us go if that mechanism were to fail, unfortunately?
Okay, well, maybe, Alan, if I flip that to you, and I've got some comments as well. And Karien, you made some comments in your opening statement as well.
My own view is that an appellate function in the WTO is absolutely essential. Dispute settlement is an essential part of the WTO, as well as rulemaking, by the way, and rule administration. And all 3 have been deficient. There needs to be legitimacy, and there needs to be understanding about what the real problems are. And is there a solution? There is a solution, in my view, a practical solution. Will it be put on the table? Will it be accepted? That's an open question. The appellate body disappears in December of 2019 at the latest. And if there's a conflict of one of the members, currently there are only 3, and you need 3 to decide a case, then the appellate body is not available now. Without rules, there's chaos. There is what we have now between the U.S. and China. They do not claim any basis under the WTO rules for some of the trade measures they're putting into place. That would be the future without an appellate function that has legitimacy and is accepted. I think it can be worked out, and there are real efforts underway to get to that position. The EU is leading one effort, and others are contributing.
Karien, have you got any comments on that?
Yes, maybe a little bit. I used to be an insider, now I'm an outsider. A little bit a view from both sides, because all of these questions are really important. And I know the WTO is looking at reforms already. But let's be honest, the trade system is stalled today, it's in jeopardy tomorrow, and that's not just since the US elections. That has been for a long time. And if we don't own up to it today and start to accelerate our reforms, 16 years, oh, the gentleman is gone, 16 years is far too long, we have to really accelerate those reforms and really be more inclusive. And that goes to developing countries, it also goes to the world of business. It goes to SMEs, it goes maybe even to gender issues. But if we don't do that, we lose the trading system. We stand to lose the trading systems if we don't do the reforms today.
Okay, two more questions. Gentleman up the front here and then the gentleman on my left. We can only take two more because then we're going to have to move to closing statements. Sir.
Good morning, I'm Mohamed Ben Moussa, Vice President of Le Mouvement d'Amir, which is an NGO in Morocco, working for reinforcing individual and collective freedoms. I will ask my question in French. Est-ce que vous n'avez pas le sentiment que le développement du commerce international est aujourd'hui victime d'une double méprise? La première méprise, c'est que c'est un développement des économies à travers le monde sans régulation mondiale, situation dans laquelle vous avez un acteur majeur qui contrôle la moitié du budget militaire mondial, qui se libère des règles du multilatéralisme et qui, pour retarder la perte d'une compétitivité dans l'économie du savoir, met un certain nombre d'obstacles au développement du commerce international. C'est la première méprise. La seconde méprise, c'est le point qu'a soulevé Madame, à juste titre. Vous avez 5-6 grands opérateurs privés, les fameux GAFAM, dont la capitalisation excède le PIB de l'Allemagne. Et ces entreprises-là n'ont pas d'organisation qui régule leur activité. Et donc nous avons cette double méprise. Et comment est-ce que les organisations que vous représentez travaillent pour essayer de rectifier, de corriger et de réduire les impacts négatifs de cette double méprise? Merci.
Isabelle, Marion, do you want to take that? Or Isabelle?
Mais par votre intervention et cette double méprise, vous résumez les problèmes dans lesquels nous nous trouvons. En effet, l'absence ou l'insuffisance de régulation, la difficulté de décider, et même de simplement décider ou d'arbitrer via le blocage de tout le système d'arbitrage au sein de l'OMC. Et donc c'est vrai, nous sommes en plein là-dedans, à savoir quels sont ou comment est-ce qu'on garde le système multilatéral, comment est-ce qu'on le réforme, comment est-ce qu'on adapte des règles au nouveau monde des grands joueurs ou des grands, surtout dans le monde digital, qui va transformer l'économie qui est en train de transformer l'économie de façon absolument gigantesque et extrêmement rapide. Alors, on le sait, par exemple, par rapport à ces grands groupes, l'Union européenne a pris une décision de plainte à l'égard, entre autres, de Google pour abus de position dominante. C'est un signal qui est donné. Je pense que l'ensemble de cette régulation ne prendra place que quand, au sein de l'ensemble des gouvernements et des grands pôles, il y aura une conscience que la présence de règles est bénéfique à tout le monde, alors que l'absence de règles nous ramène dans une discussion et dans un commerce international qui risque d'être extrêmement préjudiciable à beaucoup, y compris d'ailleurs aux pays les plus avancés ou ceux qui disposent des plus gros moyens. J'insiste aussi sur la question de l'évasion fiscale et des flux financiers illicites, qui est aussi une des questions qui trouble très fort la question du commerce mondial. Mais nous y travaillons tous à notre manière, du côté de travail avec les plus petits acteurs, c'est-à-dire les entreprises, les petites entreprises. Du côté de la CNUSET, nous travaillons essentiellement à essayer de donner des outils au gouvernement ou aux sociétés civiles pour construire des règles de protection des consommateurs et des règles de commerce plus justes. À l'OMC, je pense qu'ils ont le travail à faire sur la réforme avec toutes les difficultés auxquelles ils sont confrontés aujourd'hui. Et puis c'est vrai qu'on doit contribuer, le secteur privé doit être un acteur de ça. Il n'est pas question de penser que le secteur privé ne puisse pas être un acteur. Mais un acteur qui joue dans la transparence et dans la clarté, ce qui n'est pas toujours le cas pour certaines compagnies qui jouent leur propre carte.
Marion, did you want to add something to that?
Oui, j'aimerais ajouter aussi à ce qu'Isabelle a dit, j'aimerais ajouter une méprise. Je pense que le commerce international est des fois accusé de choses que le commerce n'a pas créées, mais d'autres facteurs ont créé. Je pense notamment au système financier. Je pense beaucoup des problèmes, des inégalités que nous voyons viennent d'un système financier qui n'est pas bien organisé. Et je pense notamment aux problèmes de taxation. Personnellement, je trouve que les initiatives à l'OCDE dans le G20 concernant le profit-based erosion, concernant la collaboration internationale sur la taxation, est très importante, sera très importante pour le soutien à la globalisation. Nous ne travaillons pas dans ce domaine, à l'ITC, à CCI. Nous travaillons sur la connexion entre petites entreprises et grandes entreprises. Donc, nous aidons des petites entreprises à travailler avec des grandes entreprises, à renforcer leur pouvoir de négociation et aussi à intéresser des investisseurs à investir dans les petites et moyennes entreprises, dans les pays émergents et les pays en voie de développement. Il n'y a pas de développement sustainable development sans les petites et moyennes entreprises. Ils emploient 70%, 70% des ouvriers, des travailleurs. S'ils ne profitent pas de la globalisation, c'est la population qui ne profite pas.
Okay, I've got a red light flashing here, but I still think I've got a little bit more time, bearing in mind the actual time frame. So the gentleman at the front here, that'll be our last question. Okay, we'll take one more after that, but if we can just make them relatively quick.
Je suis Jean-Paul, étudiant-chercheur. J'ai une question qui concerne la libéralisation du commerce international. Je souhaite savoir, est-ce que la libéralisation du commerce international ne cause pas l'insécurité alimentaire et n'est-elle pas aussi une cause de l'accroissement de la migration, étant donné que les pays en voie de développement et les pays les moins avancés tirent l'essentiel de leurs recettes budgétaires des tarifs douaniers?
Karien, you touched on a little bit of that in your opening comments. Do you want to make any response?
Yeah, first of all, au premier, first of all, I'll do it in English. First of all, a system with trade rules is still 1000% better than no rules at all. So the system that we have is better than no system at all. Secondly, as I said before, we need to reform that system. And then all of the questions you posed are coming into play. Trade facilitation, tariffs. But let's be clear, some of the, and it was said before, some of the adverse effects that we see of trade is not of trade, but is of other things. It can be globalization. It can also be businesses who don't act within their responsibility. Many businesses do. Many businesses are transparent, take their responsibility for sustainability, but some don't. And that's the responsibility both of the business world and governments to take the next steps there. But a system that is based on rules with a dispute resolution is still better than no system at all.
The gentleman 4 rows back on the left. This is our last question, then I'll ask for some, pose a question for the panel.
Oui, je parle en français. Je suis secrétaire général d'un think tank panafricain inspiré de la méthode Aspen et qui est implanté sur toute l'Afrique subsaharienne. Et donc, je voudrais juste faire 3 remarques. La première, c'est qu'effectivement, il nous apparaît que les règles sont fondamentales, donc on est vraiment là pour ça, pour en faire. Par contre, je voudrais faire 2 suggestions sur les priorités, puisque à la fin, at the end of the day, comme on dit, quelles sont les vraies priorités, nous semble-t-il. La première priorité, c'est effectivement une capacité très rapide de faire évoluer les règles, parce que le feu est vraiment sous la cendre. Et la deuxième, à mon avis, le moyen essentiel, comment y parvenir, je ne sais pas, mais c'est la prise en compte effective dans toutes ces négociations du secteur privé. Et du secteur privé incluant le secteur privé en voie d'évolution. Je pense à beaucoup de pays où beaucoup de moyennes entreprises, beaucoup de pousses, si je puis dire, sont en train d'émerger. Il faut les laisser croître, c'est-à-dire qu'effectivement, c'est là où le domaine de la finance peut écraser, c'est là où le domaine de l'intégration régionale est fondamental. Enfin, voilà, mais comment donner une place, faire parler, faire agir ce secteur privé à l'intérieur de ces négociations.
Isabelle, do you want to respond to that? Was that a no? Karien?
I think we all agree with you that we need to have faster reforms and that we really stand to lose the support for the WTO if we don't. For the role of the business, that is a very important one. I think so far, when the WTO is talking within its own membership, the governments are talking to each other, then it's not very attractive or appealing for governments to jump in. They might not even understand what all those technical issues are about. But it's truly essential that businesses are involved in the reform process of the WTO. And the ICC has launched an initiative to actually gather all the inputs of the businesses, global dialogue on trade, and bring that into the reform discussions on the WTO. So please, if you have any comments, if you have any input, join that discussion in the ICC and give us your comments, especially with your view on Africa.
Yeah, it's very useful. But before Isabel, just one comment. I mean, I co-chair with the B20, the trade dialogues at the WTO, which is a relatively recent initiative. It's extraordinary that it is an initiative because it's the only time that the business community actually directly engages with the members in Geneva. As I was saying to Alan before I came on, my general perspective and takeaway is that there's actually a level of resentment for engagement with the private sector in that discussion. It's like, what are you doing here? This is not your business. Well, actually, what we're trying to do, particularly in terms of moving forward to create a multilateral trading system which may well be fit for purpose for the 21st century, we do think a stakeholder like the business community has an obligation to get involved, which is why we've created this platform to enable a dialogue on trade. Isabel, your last comment, then I want to round off.
Oui, c'est plus un exemple que je voulais donner pour illustrer ce que vous dites sur l'inclusion du secteur privé. Je prends un exemple particulier, la question très concrète de la résistance aux antibiotiques et de la façon dont le secteur privé peut être inclus dans quelque chose qui est essentiel en termes à la fois de santé publique, d'économie et de développement d'activités et d'emplois, y compris en Afrique. C'est pas facile d'inclure un secteur privé pharmaceutique qui doit se mettre à table, pour développer du business local en Afrique, mais aussi pour finalement lutter contre ce qui fait leur bénéfice, à savoir la résistance aux antibiotiques. Et donc, ce sont des exemples concrets pour vous dire que mettre en place une discussion avec des acteurs économiques, des acteurs qui sont des acteurs de la santé, mais qui sont avant tout des acteurs qui jouent dans un système très concurrentiel, où les bénéfices des secteurs pharmaceutiques sont liés à l'ensemble du bénéfice. On vient de décrire un peu le système financier qui fait qu'aujourd'hui, une entreprise qui ne fait pas un certain pourcentage de bénéfices risque d'être tout à fait exclue du système. Et donc, la difficulté est celle-là, c'est d'inclure un secteur privé qui accepte de jouer pour le bien commun, tout en tenant compte des règles globales dans lesquelles il opère. On ne peut pas faire semblant qu'on ne voit pas le secteur, la concurrence dans le secteur pharmaceutique entre les grands groupes, pour pouvoir construire une vraie stratégie qui permet à des pays africains de développer sur leur propre territoire, leurs propres entreprises, leur propre savoir-faire sur la mise en œuvre de médicaments adéquats par rapport aux maladies tropicales ou à la résistance aux antibiotiques. Eh bien, rien que faire ça, je peux vous dire que c'est un exercice sur lequel on se casse les dents depuis des années et des années, parce que, alors que c'est tout simple et c'est quelque chose dont tout le monde peut comprendre l'intérêt, ça n'est pas facile. Donc, je n'ai pas ici la solution et j'espère que l'originalité de mettre ensemble des négociateurs ou des gens qui discutent avec différents angles de vue peut aider à faire aboutir à des compromis et à des négociations plus équitables sur la manière de construire une stratégie gagnante du point de vue économique et gagnante du point de vue de la santé pour le secteur pharmaceutique, mais aussi pour tous ceux qui en bénéficient.
Alan, you want to make a comment?
The WTO exists for business. It's the World Organization for Commerce. By business, it can be one individual. Some person on the web sits at their laptop in some remote location in any country and develops an app. And they're in business, and they are in business across borders. If we do not listen to those who are engaged in commerce, we do not know what we're doing. When I was a negotiator for the U.S. government, the Congress of the United States, in its wisdom, I thought, saddled us with 45 advisory committees, technical and policy, industry, agriculture, and labor. And I thought it was a terrible burden. And in fact, it was something that put us in an enormously favorable position to understand what we had to go after, what we had to seek, and what we had to avoid in terms of the commercial interests of the United States. So business is absolutely essential. The input of business is something that we desperately need. We are a member-driven organization. The resistance, if there is some, on the part of any member's representative is not also resistance from the Secretariat of the WTO. We want to hear from people, but we are governed by 164 voices of member states, and to the extent they are listening to their businesses, to their NGOs, to every part of their civil society, they'll be better informed and they'll come out with better results. So we're all for it.
So let's move to a close. We are in 2018, the year not only of the centenary, but the year of the tweet. So if I can ask each of you, if you had one suggestion to make, limited by a tweet, because we can gather them together and tweet them out, what would it be? Marion, starting with you. One suggestion to make for an improvement to the way in which we govern global trade.
I would say go ITC, that's us. Go ITC because we bring small business to forums like this, to the WTO, to the China Import Expo, but also because we need 3 areas of collaboration that are reflected in our name, ITC. It's infrastructure, collaboration on taxation, and collaboration on competition policy. So you do all of that.
That's not bad for a very, very long set of 6 tweets. That's good. Isabel, what would you say?
I would say to, especially to the developing countries, support you small producers and support a regional approach of trade before to jump in the international trade today. That's the better way to reinforce you small players in order to give them some chance to be part, finally, to the international trade.
Alan?
There's been 70 years of no global war. There's been 70 years of growth of world trade. There's been 70 years of 1 billion people lifted out of poverty due to an international trading system, a multilateral trading system, and we need your support.
Karien.
Let's not take trade and a good trade system for granted. It has brought us so much, but today we need to accelerate the reforms in our current system or we stand to lose it all. And we need to include business.
Look, can I thank the panels and the audience? In closing, I make 2 observations. The 2 themes that I heard coming through, putting aside admiring the complexity of the issue we're confronted with, it really comes around, one, that if we actually want the system to evolve, you can change all the rules you like, unless there's a changed attitude from the member states, but this is a global attitude about the need for rules, regulations, which actually help mitigate and actually help balance the world, then without that attitude, all the rules you like, and as we've seen most recently, can just be ignored if we shift to great power. The other is to be participants in the system is not to be supplicants in the system. The way to shift that is you've got to bring value. Everyone is capable of bringing a suggestion, an idea, and a process. It's not a matter of wealth. It's actually a matter then of creating real intellectual capital, ideas, and processes and suggestions for the future. And in many respects, those 2 themes together, changed attitude around the actual need for the system and actually what it means, but also how you can make the system effective by everyone bringing something which is creating value. As Karien said, we do at the ICC want to hear the voices because this is an important part of building a dialogue on what the multilateral trading system looks like. If I can encourage you, if you have an opportunity, to look at our website and actually open up the Global Dialogue on Trade, and if you can, participate. So thank you all, and thanks to our speakers, and thanks for your attention.